There are things in the deep woods that aren't meant to be found. You hear stories about cults and rituals, but you never think you'll be the one stumbling into their territory on a random Saturday night until they start chasing you. The following story was sent in by a friend of mine from South Carolina. It's a terrifying reminder that when you step off the beaten path, you're entering a world where the normal rules of society don't apply. This is the story of when boredom with nothing to do leads to a fight for survival. It was late October when my 3 friends, let's call them Mike, Jose, and David, and I decided to explore a patch of heavy woodland just outside of town. We weren't avid hikers or anything like that, just looking for a spot to hang out and maybe drink a few beers to waste some time on a Saturday night. We parked my car on a gravel service road and just started walking. No trail, no GPS, just wandering. We were having a good time, laughing and cutting up, not realizing how much ground we were covering. By the time the sun started dipping below the tree line, casting those long, creepy shadows against the pines, we realized we had no idea which way the car was. The woods in South Carolina get incredibly dense, and everything starts to look exactly the same once the light fades. We were trying to retrace our steps when Jose stopped us. "Do you hear that?" he whispered. I strained my ears. At first it just sounded like the wind, but then I heard it. A low, rhythmic humming. It sounded like voices all chanting in unison. We assumed maybe we were near a campsite or some kids partying, so we headed toward the sound, hoping to ask for directions. As we got closer, the smell hit us first. It wasn't just campfire smoke. It was the smell of what I can only describe as burning hair and meat. It was nauseating. We got to a small ridge and looked down into a clearing, and what I saw made my blood instantly run cold. There were about a dozen of them. They were wearing these long, dark robes with hoods pulled completely over their faces. They were standing in a perfect circle around a massive bonfire. In the center of the fire, I don't even want to describe it in detail, but it was an animal, a large one, and they were chanting in a language that sounded guttural, ancient. It didn't sound human. We were frozen, absolutely paralyzed with fear. I remember gripping a tree for support, my knuckles turning white. Then, Mike stepped backward. Snap! A dry branch cracked under his boot. It sounded like a gunshot in the quiet woods. The chanting stopped instantly. Every single hooded head snapped in our direction. For a second, nobody moved. Then, one of them let out a scream, a high-pitched shriek, and pointed at us. "Run!" I yelled. We scrambled back down the ridge, tearing through thorns and bushes. We didn't care about the scratches, we just ran. Behind us, we could hear heavy footsteps and shouting. They were fast. They knew these woods, and we didn't. We were sprinting blindly in the pitch black, tripping over roots, fueled entirely by fear and adrenaline. I could hear them getting closer, their flashlights cutting through the trees behind us. We saw a rock formation coming out of a hill and spotted a small opening, a shallow cave, barely big enough for the 4 of us. We dove inside, huddled together in the dirt, and held our breath. We lay there for hours. We could hear them walking past the entrance, their boots crunching on the leaves just feet away from our faces. We were definitely outnumbered, judging by the amount of footsteps we heard. We didn't move. We didn't speak. We just prayed they wouldn't shine a light in there. Eventually, the footsteps faded, but we were too terrified to leave. We stayed in that freezing cave until the sky started to turn gray. When the sun finally came up, we crept out. We walked for maybe 20 minutes before we hit a paved road. I've never been so happy to see asphalt. We had service, finally. We called an Uber immediately. The driver didn't say a word about why 4 dudes covered in dirt and mud were standing on the side of a back road at 7 a.m. We didn't offer an explanation either. We went back for my car 2 days later. We were absolutely terrified to go back, and for good reason. When we got to my car, there was a piece of paper attached to the windshield. No damage, just a random white piece of paper. It was a note, and it read, "Stay away," with a smiley face. This absolutely terrified me to my core, and served as my lesson to never go into the woods ever again. Since that night, nothing ever happened. We all went on with our lives as usual, but with a new appreciation for life. If you're ever in the woods of South Carolina at night and you hear chanting, Don't investigate, just run. Just... There is a specific kind of silence in the Appalachian Mountains. It feels heavy, like the trees are watching you. But the only thing worse than that silence is when it breaks. Not by the sound of a bear or a coyote, but by a human voice. A voice that asks you to step out of your tent and into the dark, miles away from civilization. This happened about 6 years ago. My girlfriend Sarah and I decided we needed a break from the city, so we planned an overnight camping trip in the Blue Ridge Mountains. We didn't want a crowded campground, so we drove deep down an old logging road that looked like it hadn't been touched in years. My girlfriend Sarah and I were going through a rough patch around this time, so we figured this trip would also help fix our relationship, as we both met for the first time on a hiking trip in these same mountains. We found a clearing near a misty hollow after a long hike and decided this would be our campsite for the night. The hike started out amazing. It was beautiful during the day, but as soon as the sun dipped behind the ridges, the atmosphere changed. The temperature dropped 20 degrees, and that heavy, oppressive silence settled in. We ate some dinner we packed over by the fire, but I couldn't shake the feeling that we were being watched from the tree line. We put the fire out and zipped up the tent around 11 p.m. I eventually drifted off, but a few hours later, I snapped awake. I didn't know why at first, but then I heard it. Footsteps. Slow, deliberate footsteps circling our campsite. It wasn't the four-legged trot of an animal. It was the two-legged rhythmic walk of a person. I froze, my hand instinctively gripping the hatchet I had brought in before going to bed. I shook Sarah awake, putting a hand over her mouth. I whispered softly, yet firmly, "Babe, there is someone outside, please don't scream." She shook her head in agreement as I removed my hand from her mouth. The footsteps stopped right in front of the tent door. Against my better judgment, I slowly unzipped the fly just an inch to peek out. Standing at the edge of the dead campfire, maybe 10 feet away, was an old woman. She looked ancient, wearing a tattered, thin nightgown that was far too cold for the weather. Her hair was long, gray, and matted. I froze with fear and disbelief of what I was seeing. She wasn't looking at the ground. She was staring right at the tent. Then, she raised a bony hand and curled her finger, beckoning me to come out. She whispered, loud enough to hear through the fabric, "Hey, sorry to wake you up. Could you please help me? I have something to show you." She began walking backward toward the thickest part of the woods, still smiling, still waving for us to follow. Sarah let out a whimper as she asked, crying, who that was and what was going on. I closed the zipper, looked at her, and mouthed the words, "She's gone, we're okay," to reassure her. We didn't move. We sat there, terrified, clutching each other until the sun started to bleed through the trees. As soon as there was light, we threw everything into the back of the truck in record time. We didn't even fold the tent. We just shoved it into our tent bag. On the way out, about 5 miles down the main road, we saw a park ranger's truck parked on the shoulder. I pulled over, adrenaline still pumping, and flagged him down. I told him there was a confused old woman wandering around near the hollow without any gear, hoping the ranger would reassure me that they would go and help this woman, or at the very least investigate my claim. The ranger didn't look surprised. He just looked sad. He asked, "Did she try to get you to follow her into the tree line?" Frozen by his question, I nodded. He sighed and looked toward the woods, and what he told me scared me to my absolute core. "Son, that's Widow Thorne. Legend says she died out here in the 1920s looking for her lost husband during a blizzard. They say she tries to lure campers into the deep woods to help her find him, but those who follow her usually don't find their way back." After a brief moment of silence and recounting the events of the night in my head, I thanked the ranger and returned to the truck. Sarah fell asleep as I made the drive back home after taking a quick nap at a rest area. Once we were home and unpacking, I told Sarah what the ranger told me, and I could tell the fear she had as her face turned pale. Me and Sarah are now married and still enjoy the outdoors. We've been on several hiking trips ever since, however we no longer camp on those trips. My advice to anyone who camps in the Appalachian Mountains: be very careful. Aside from the elements and wild animals, you never really know what else is hiding inside the woods.